Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first webinar of the 2024 Regeneron STS application season. My name is Allie Stiefel, and I'm the director of Regeneron STS. I'm joined by my colleague Elaine, who I will allow to introduce herself as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elaine Edwards. I am the Senior Specialist for the Science Talent Search. And just echoing Allie, we are so excited to be here with you today.
That's right. If you're here, you're already getting a head start. So we're proud of you for opening your application and joining us to learn a little bit more about some early bird tips and tricks. How can you get that head start you're looking for on your STS application? We're going to start with just a little intro. I imagine that you know a little bit about the Science Talent Search if you're already here today, but if not, the Science Talent Search is the nation's oldest and most prestigious science research competition in the United States. It's open to high school seniors who live in the U.S. or U.S. citizens who are living abroad. Science Talent Search uses a holistic review process. We consider so many parts of your life in our review process as well. We'll talk about that a little bit today. And of course, we award some pretty cool prizes. The top prize for first place is $250,000. And in total, we award about $3 million a year, thanks to our generous sponsor, Regeneron. Should also say that the Science Talent Search is a program of Society for Science. You might receive emails from us if you're signed up with an application. We're the nonprofit that has owned and produced the Science Talent Search since 1942. Our application is currently open. I hope you've already taken a chance to go through it. If not, definitely recommend you open it right away. And it will stay open until November 8th, 2023 at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We already talked about this. Who can enter STS? Hopefully it's you, those of you who are joining us here today, or maybe you're a supportive adult working with students. You do have to be in your final year of high school. You must have completed an independent research project. So unfortunately, this competition is not for team projects that have been conducted with another high school student. However, if you've worked with a lab of adults only, then your project is probably eligible. But you also need to make sure your research adheres to our research rules. You can check out on our website, on the application website, all over task 3 of the application as well, to learn a little bit more about what those rules are and if your project adheres to them. Today, we're going to go through some of our top 10 tips for early birds like you who are already getting a head start. We'll tell you some of the top ways that you can avoid feeling overwhelmed. We know it's a really long process and you're doing so many things on top of this, right? You have your college applications, your normal coursework, and a lot of activities. We know STS entrants are really busy people. So we hope that you're going to walk away from today with some tips to break it down so it's a little more digestible, make it a little bit easier for you and feel a little less overwhelming. And how to get ahead if you're feeling stuck. We know that can happen sometimes too. And hopefully answer some frequently asked questions you might have along the way. If you have a question that we are not answering or haven't gotten to quite yet, please feel free to leave it in the chat. At the end of our session today, we'll take some questions from the audience and Elaine and I will be happy to answer them. So please do leave them in the chat. So if you're ready, we're going to take a look at those top 10 tips.
All right, and so let's take it away with our first tip. We are going to suggest first and foremost that you explore the application. This is a super easy way to get started. Again, if you're here, you might have already taken a chance to poke around inside of that application, but if you haven't, this is a great way to go in and see what's required. One of the great things about our application is you don't have to submit it right away. You can save your work, edit your work as you go. So amazing idea to go through and just read through each task. And that way you can read through the requirements. You will be able to make a checklist of documents. This is especially important for those of you who might be working with humans or vertebrate animals or PHBAs. You will have some special paperwork that will need you to submit. But in all different types of the application, definitely a great idea to go through. Make yourself a list of what you're going to need to complete the application before you get started.
Very good. Tip number 2, you want to request your recommendations ASAP, right away, if you've not done it already. Might seem a little early since you have until November, but we'll give you a few reasons why you want to do that now. You want to give your adults who are helping you with this plenty of time. They are human beings too. They get busy with their personal lives. And you got to remember, they're not able to submit recommendations after the November 8th deadline either. That's a deadline for you and for them. They might encounter account issues. This is very common. It's more common for adults than it is for students, especially if they've helped students in past years. So they might have some trouble logging in, and that might take up a little bit of time. So make sure that they have time to get over that hurdle. They might have hundreds of students to help. You might not be the only one. And so make sure that they have plenty of time to get through all the students that they need to help. We hear sometimes that students wait until they're further along in the process because they want to be done with their project or really done with their application before a recommender writes the recommendation for them. I'm going to tell you today, don't do that. They don't have to finish the recommendation now, but there are so many questions, really almost all, probably all of the questions for some of these recommendations, they can finish even if you haven't completed your project. Two of the recommendations, the high school report and the educator recommendation, are not really about the project. There's one question about how much the teacher knows about the project in the educator rec, but they don't really have to know if you finished it, or they can update their answer later. So give them plenty of time because they might want to get started. They might want to know what the questions are to think about them. You want to give them plenty of time. Another tip to help prevent some account issues, right? We talked about that could be a reason they get delayed. Check in with them first before you request the recommendation. You want to ask them, what is your preferred email address for this process? The reason for this is because if a lot of students are requesting recommendations from the same adult, or even two, right? And they both each use a different email address. And I'm the professor or mentor, and I only check my personal account. I don't check my work account as much, or other way around. I might think, oh no, Elaine didn't request a recommendation for me, even if she did, and I might forget to do it, or that kind of thing. It can be very confusing for them as well to have two accounts for the same thing. So double check with them. That really helps them out a lot. The other group that hesitates sometimes to fill this out, and you can help them by preemptively answering questions, and we try to as well, but they'll trust it more hearing it from you, the entrant. Your guidance counselors, they're the people who are completing your high school report. The guidance counselors sometimes hesitate to fill that form out. Most of the questions they're answering are not about you, they're about your school. We do ask some statistical questions, or, like, what's your current enrollment? Is your school Title I? Like a couple questions like that are about the school. Sometimes they want to wait until they can give us an exact number. We really don't need an exact number. An estimate is totally fine for us. So tell them, if it's 11,001 versus 11,000, they can estimate. It's really fine if that helps them get it done now so they can save time later. We know how busy counselors are, especially in November. And the other thing to know to help them out, we only need your grades from last semester or through last semester. So freshman year through the end of your junior year. We don't need your quarterly grades. Sometimes counselors will wait because they think that uploading the quarterly grades will help for the fall. It does not. We do not care. We want through your junior year. So please let them know that, and that might help them get it done sooner. The last tip for this section, check in with your recommenders about our ethics statement. Hopefully in our rules book, which we ask that all entrants review, you've seen that we have an ethics statement that we ask you to sign. You've probably seen some questions in the application as well that are around, that are asking you for some disclosure. This is very common in grant programs and in science in general, being ethical, disclosing conflicts of interest. So what we want to know is, did you have a prior relationship with your mentor or anyone in your lab before you embarked on this journey together? It is totally fine if you do. It's often the reason a student even gets into science. So it's totally understandable, but it's good to know if, like, your parent is your mentor's boss. And then if we found out later, it looks kind of sketchy, right? If you didn't tell us, but if you tell us, oh, it's all cool. The person can still have independent thought and still think you're like the best student they've ever worked with. That's very possible. You're probably very smart, right? Your parent is their boss. I don't know. But it's important to disclose that information just so it doesn't look sketchy on the other end. I'm sure you guys get it But please help them understand that too, just to be honest in their answers, just like you're going to be. Same with paid program fees, kind of the same deal. We know that paid program fees really run the gamut. And sometimes you're paying very modest fees for a program, or sometimes there's a reason you've got a really cool opportunity, but you've worked really hard over whatever the circumstances. We do need to know about paid programs, and they need to disclose it on their end as well.
All right, our next suggestion for you is that when you get started in that application, go ahead and start with tasks 1, 8, 10, and 11. These are pretty simple tasks. They collect things like demographic information, test scores if you choose to share them. Again, a reminder that Regeneron STS is test optional, so your choice on whether or not you want to share those with us. But regardless, these are all tasks where your answers aren't really going to change much between now and November. And you also won't have to think too hard about answering these questions. Things like, what's your address? That one's going to be pretty easy to put into that application. And you're just going to walk away feeling great that you've checked off so much of that list so early. And this is going to motivate you to keep going. And just a good reminder that consistency is key. We recommend that you schedule 30-minute blocks to maybe an hour per week to work on your application. With this, again, you're making it a habit for yourself, and it's going to make it easier to chip away at it a little bit at a time. And with that, you're going to finish sooner than you think. We definitely don't recommend trying to cram that whole application process into a few days. As you can see, it's a lot of tasks. It can be pretty overwhelming, but doing a little bit at a time is a great way to help break it down for yourself.
Very good. Tip number 4, spend some time in task 3. The task 3 in the application is the rules task, or maybe the rules wizard, it might say at the top. It's a series of mostly if-then questions that you will answer about your project that then will lead to other questions, right? Like a decision tree that will guide you towards the kind of paperwork you need to share with us, and some other questions we need to answer just to make sure your project really does adhere to those eligibility guidelines. We have the rules book, so we recommend you screen through it, but we know it can be pretty dense. So if you're not sure if your project is eligible to begin with, go to task 3, and that's kind of show you what you need. And if you're like, oh, I don't see my scenario here, or you still have a question, you can email our team, sts@societyforscience.org, and we'll help you out with that. But in terms of task 3, go there because learning what forms you need to submit to us that show proof of pre-approval, maybe a receipt if you bought a commercial cell line, something like that. It will tell you what you need, and you're going to want to know what those things are early in case you don't have them handy, in case you need to go to your mentor or your teacher and say, hey, I didn't know I needed like this receipt, but do you have it? Or can you help me provide a note? And our wizard will tell you what the note should say and who should sign it and all of that. But just to know like what to anticipate so you have time to gather that content. And also the rules can just be kind of confusing. So to give yourself a little extra time to read through and understand them can be really helpful as well.
All right, another thing that's going to be helpful is obviously finishing your project. You definitely don't have to be done quite yet. We definitely see entrants who are successful, who completed their research a lot closer to the deadline. But we can absolutely say that it does help a lot to finish a bit earlier, just so that you have time to write that research paper and answer a lot of the project-related questions within the application. Definitely worth it to give yourself the gift of time closer to the deadline when things are a little more stressful and there's more going on. You're going to end up saving yourself some stress in the long run.
Yeah, totally. Like if you have to prioritize a given week, like, oh, my project isn't done, should I spend an hour on my project or an hour on my application? Definitely do your project first. Tip number 6, get to know yourself. This is just a good tip, I think, for a lot of the things that you will be working on this year, like college applications or other scholarships. We recommend that you, before you get too far in our process, or maybe even those, pause and do this exercise. And you're going to write down a couple of things. These answers to these questions we'll go through should then kind of act as your North Star, your guiding light, your thesis for all of these materials, so that you can fill out applications like ours and then reference back to what you've written here and say, do I shine through in this application? Do you see most of these components that I've written down here about myself on this piece of paper or on this computer or in this PDF, right? If not, you might want to go back and make some revisions just because we want to get to know you. We know you're not a robot. We hope you're not a robot. Please don't use ChatGPT. But if you, but we want to get to know you as a human. We do use a holistic review process. Context of your life is really important, and what's important to you is important to us to know. Anyway, so here are the questions that we want you to ask yourself. What are 5 things that are most important to you in life? They can be anything. It can be simple, right? Like, I love baseball. I whatever it is, my religion is important to me. These are all valid things. Anything in life that's important to you. And then 5 things that you want to make sure we know about your project. Like, my project is faster than the current thing out there, right? Like, I worked really hard on my project. Whatever those 5 things are, again, they can be really important or a small detail that you want to make sure we see. Write it down as like your checklist. As you know, Science Talent Search looks for future leaders in STEM. So a leadership component is important to us. Jot down 5 ways that you show leadership in your everyday life, or that you show potential for leadership. It doesn't mean that we don't pick every class president to become a Science Talent Search finalist, because we believe that there are ways you show leadership probably in your everyday life. Like, how do you help in your family unit? Do you have a religious obligation that you support at church or whatever? Do you have, there are a lot of, are you on a co-captain of the soccer team? There are a lot of ways to show leadership. Or have you led a special project at school? Even if it's being a leader in the classroom or leader on a group project, that helps too. So, write down a couple of examples. And then to help with our process, jot down first 7 that come to mind. The top 7 ways you spend your time. This will help you later in our activities section, because that's what we really ask for. We don't care about your fanciest activities. Don't write down, I am the best banjo player in the state of Virginia. If you only really play the banjo 5 minutes a day, right? Like, that's cool. It's a cool hobby. Maybe you want to mention it, but it's not, as impressive as I babysit my siblings at home after school 5 days a week. That's really how you're spending your time. And so that helps us to know the context of your life and where science fits in and where other accomplishments fit in. So think about, that time exercise is really important, and that'll help you out later. Another question to ask yourself in general is, what was your contribution to your project? It might be, I did the whole thing 100%, no mentor. That's cool. Those kind of kids make it to the finals. Also, kids make it to the finals who worked in a lab setting where they did a portion of a published paper, but it was an important portion. But you need to be able to identify what you did. So if we're thinking about these questions that you want then reflected in your application later, that's another one I might add to this list. Am I shining through in my application?
All right. So our next tip for you is don't overthink the essays. We know that it can be really tough to answer the essays that are in task 7 of our application, or even to answer some of those questions about you and your project in task 4. So we actually have a couple tips for you. Our number 1 is record yourself answering the questions. You can transcribe your answers afterward, and you'll have a great start that you can edit to the word limit. But just talking out loud and seeing what comes to mind as those answers is a great way to jog your answers and your eventual response. It's going to make it seem much more natural and much more you. Similarly, another great thing you can do is try some word association. What words are coming to mind once you're reading those essay prompts? Write those down. You can use them to come up with a great start that, again, is going to be representative of you. Another important thing to note about your essays, and just one of our top tips in general, we do definitely recommend saving your essays somewhere outside of the application system. So maybe that's Word, that's Google Docs, just anywhere where you have access to a copy of those should something happen to the application system. We see it all the time where maybe there's a power outage, maybe our vendor goes down, as definitely happens a couple times throughout the cycle. We definitely don't want you to lose work because of things out of your or our control like that. And then once you do have that viable draft ready to go, you're able to just pop those right into the application. As a reminder, we don't even look at your responses or do any evaluating of applications until well after the deadline. So you're able to save and continue your work as you go.
Tip number 8, start on your research paper. Even if your project is not finished, there are a couple of things you can do just to kind of build the framework of it or become familiar with what you need to do later, right? A lot of this is like a mental game of like, what do I need to do? And what are the steps to getting there? How can I break them down? Also good advice for college. If your project is not finished, you can still check out the research report guidelines. You can find those a bunch of places in the application system on our website. We do have some requirements for this 20-page paper you're going to submit to us about your research. You can build a format, right? Like make your title page. That's easy. You can start your bibliography. You probably already have your resources, maybe, I would guess. You can start to build out certain sections or just start to jot some stuff down where you might want them to be later, that content to be later. Spend 30 minutes doing this task, and it's really going to pay off down the line, because if you're tired, you're trying to finish this, having some of that content already on paper, even if it's not perfect, is just a really good start. Every little bit helps.
Yes, it does. All right, so our next tip for you is tip number 9, explore our materials on the application website. So if you poke around, you are going to find a ton of resources and information that's going to be helpful to you throughout the application process, both on that application website, but also on the program homepage at our societyforscience.org website. So again, you're going to find everything from our past webinars. You'll be able to find those on our YouTube page, to tutorials for getting through the application and each application task. So if you're having some funky trouble with the system, that can be a great resource for you. You'll also find things on our website, like, again, those FAQs, which we have for applicants and recommenders. Also a list of reasons common reasons that projects fail to qualify. So you can check yourself and your research against those, make sure you're not falling into some of those common pitfalls. Basically, our important thing to note is that you're just going to find all kinds of great additional advice if you look. But it's also important to note that you can also always email us at sts@societyforscience.org. The earlier you know what questions you have that you can't resolve through our resources, the sooner you can email us and get a response. We definitely do not recommend waiting until the days before the deadline to get the answers that you need, because that's when we are getting a ton of inquiries. You want to make sure that you're getting a quick response. Sooner is better in that case. Last thing that we will recommend on this front is definitely reading through. Obviously, the entire rules book is a great resource, but especially those project category descriptions. We aren't really allowed to provide advice on what category you should choose for your project. That's very much up to you, but those descriptions are going to help you decide. So one of the things that we recommend is thinking about what kind of scientist is best equipped to evaluate your work. We understand that a lot of times research is very interdisciplinary. So be assured that if the scientist who is assigned to review your project, if they need help and they say, I actually think, oh, this is an environmental science project, but it has some computational biology elements, they can request additional expertise in an outside category. We'll make sure that your project gets to the eyes who need to see it most.
Exactly. And also, this is not a 101 session. So if you go back to some of our prior sessions, maybe you already know this, but to be super clear, Science Talent Search does not award prizes in categories. Our sister competition, Regeneron ICEF, does, but we don't. We have no quotas, no for states, for category, anything like that. So really, it's the only reason you're choosing a category is to choose the type of scientist that is reviewing your paper. All right, and our final tip, mark your calendar. The last thing we want to happen, especially to our early birds who are here learning so early in the process. The last thing we want you to happen to you is to miss the deadline. You'll have completed your application and then somehow November 8th comes and goes and emergencies happen. But be aware, we have notoriously a very strict deadline. We start our evaluation and rules process the very next day. So we do not take any exceptions for tardiness. If you're not in at 8 p.m. on November 8th Eastern time, you're out. So this is why we recommend that students submit early. You can submit, like Elaine said earlier, at any time in the process that you've actually have content in all of the tasks, but we don't look at it, and you can keep editing it and saving those changes up until that deadline. So as soon as you can hit submit, I would hit submit, even if you're not like totally done and you want to finish up some essays later, that's fine. But partially completed essay is better than nothing. Or if you're just like, a lot of students will spend a lot of time wordsmithing, it's your choice. This is a science competition, not an English competition, but it is on paper. So this is how you have to communicate. So it is very important not to undermine that. But just don't let the details get in the way of the bigger picture of submitting is kind of the message here. So mark your calendar November 8th, but also mark your calendar for November 7th at 8 p.m. Eastern time. That's the technical support deadline. Any question, concern, problem with our website that is reported to us or sent to us by that time, the technical support deadline is guaranteed to be resolved by the next day's deadline. After that, we cannot guarantee resolution of the issue. So we actually recommend that you submit by around on November 7th, so that you know if there's any problem that you need to contact us for to get it resolved, so that you have not wasted your time the last many months on your hard work. Yeah, that's what we recommend. So set a calendar notice, put it on your fridge, put it everywhere you can, just so that you do not miss it. Other important dates, the scholar and finalist announcements. So of course you finish this process. Will you become a top 300 scholar or even a top 40 finalist? I don't know yet, but we will know later this fall, and we'll announce those winners in January of 2024. So good luck, it could be you. We're now happy to answer any questions from the audience that they might have today. Hopefully we've answered some questions you have or provided some tips that are helpful. Elaine, are there any questions in the chat?
Yes, we do have a few. A couple questions really related to eligibility. So maybe you can go through and talk a little bit more about the eligibility requirements as a whole, I think would be helpful.
Oh, sure. So eligibility requirements for STS, who can enter, you must be in your final year of high school. You must be either a student in their final year of high school who's living in the United States of any citizenship. So if you live in the US, you're a 12th grader, you don't have to be a US citizen as long as you're living here to apply, or US citizens who are living abroad. Those are the people who are eligible. On top of that, you must have completed an individual research project. You can't submit a team project or split a team project done with another high school student. And you must adhere to our scientific rules. So if you have questions specifically about your project and if it meets the scientific rules, I would check out our rules book. Mostly the problems will arise with human research, vertebrate animal research, and potentially hazardous biological agents like mold, bacteria, that kind of stuff. And there are some rules around hazardous materials, like how dangerous is your project. So check out the rules book, but we're also able to answer questions by email.
Awesome. All right, and then we have another question here. What is the balance of how each of the application components is weighed?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm going to give you a frustrating answer, which is that all of it matters. It is very true. I've been in this role for 7 years and ran our middle school national competition before that. Elena's been doing this for a long time now too. We have sat through so many discussions where finalists are chosen by the judges and winners are chosen. And I can tell you that everything does matter. So your research is important. your answers to those essay questions about kind of the way that show the way that you think, the context of your personal life, like if you've gone through any challenges, that's important for us to know. It helps us to weigh the accomplishments, or even tell us about all of your exciting accomplishments, even if maybe it doesn't seem that cool to you, but like maybe our evaluators are like, wow, he did that and he did a research project at the same time. Like, that's amazing. That shows really strong time management skills, right? So it is all very important. And I know that's a frustrating answer, but the best advice I can give for that is that's why it's important to be yourself in your application. Sometimes students think that they have to be perfect to do well in this program, and that's just not true. It's better to show us all of you, the good and maybe the bad, or like where you've struggled. Like, you know, I didn't do great in my chemistry class and it was really hard for me. And, you know, but I'm still here, I'm still trying, and I still love science. Like that's an important story. So not to put words in your mouth about that, but yeah, no, that's why it's important to make yourself shine through. Anything you'd add to that, Elaine?
No, I think that really covers it. Just, I think that's a very popular question, is people want to know if we have a rubric, if we can share any kind of that information. And the answer is no, both because our process is proprietary in ours, but also because, like Ali said, it is holistic. Everything really does matter. We've said many, many times in other presentations that context is really key. Another thing we often say is, what are you doing with the opportunities available to you and in your specific environment? The more you can give us information about your life and your specific situations, the more useful that's going to be in the evaluation process. All right, a lot of other questions coming in here. Thanks, everyone. Hope we can get to everybody. Let me see. Does ISEF participation affect STS?
Yes and no, right? Like it's a great accomplishment. So congratulations. Maybe you even won an award at ISEF. Also, congratulations. That's so great. You know, not everyone has a chance to go to ISEF. So it doesn't give you like a leg up automatically in our process, if that's what the question is asking. But a lot of ISEF finalists do really well in STS. And, you know, the reason for that is because they do really like STEM. You have a lot of good experience and obviously a really good project. What we do see happen from time to time, so don't be surprised if you see this happening in your region. Students do well in STS who didn't go to ISEF, or maybe they kind of make it to the top 300 for STS, but they didn't qualify for ISEF through their regional fair. Another student did who didn't make the top 300. Well, there are a lot of reasons why that could happen, right? It's because we look for totally different things. It's our sister competition. I'm an ISEF alum, so I love ISEF. Nothing against it, but let me explain this to you. ISEF looks for the best research in a given year around the world, right? STS looks for future leaders in STEM. So the research is important, but for STS, you can submit research from any year of high school. So, you know, maybe somebody's sophomore year project is stronger than your senior year project, or maybe you wrote a stronger essays than some other student and that balanced it out, or who knows, right? But we're looking at full student, and at ISEF, none of that matters. It's just the research. Also, there are no limits to the number of students who can apply from a given school to STS. That is not true at ISEF, right? We have the regional fair network. You have to earn a spot. There are only so many spots to go to ISEF from each fair, and even to go to those affiliated fairs from high schools a lot of the time, right? But we know, like, there are a lot of great high schools out there. And we know that, especially if you go to like a magnet school or like a STEM, like a state STEM boarding school, we see this happen a lot, where all the students in the projects are strong because they're pulling from the full state, whereas those students are all competing against each other at ISEF for limited spots. So it's a different game. You want to think of it as a game. So there'll be different winners, but it helps in that it is a great accomplishment to put on there with everything else if you have it. So congratulations, it's awesome.
Great. All right. I think we probably have time for a couple more. Can a student submit multiple projects?
No, a student can combine multiple years of the same research, which is slight difference from ISEF. Continuation projects are allowed at ISEF, but really focusing on what you did that year for the continuation. For STS, it can all be combined, but it needs to be the same project. You can't combine, like, I made a robot and I did something with mold. I mean, I don't know, maybe maybe it's all one, I don't know. But if it's not, and they're totally different projects, you can't submit both. You have to choose one. The essays are really tailored to one project.
All right, so I think our last one here, if you conducted an independent project without a mentor, who should complete your project recommendation?
Yes, that is a good question. This one comes up a lot too, because this is a common scenario. You do need to have a project recommendation for a couple of reasons. One, just to verify that like safety procedures were followed. So if there's an adult, it can be a parent. They just need to acknowledge that they're your parent, and then they can acknowledge or tell us in the answers that I wasn't really involved here, except like I saw that they didn't burn the house down or whatever it is, right? And they can tell us what they did see you do. Like, I saw my child work very hard. Like, that's acceptable. Your teacher can do the same. A science teacher can do the same thing, even if they were not involved in your project. Maybe they've heard you talk about it, or they can vouch for, safety or whatever. But we do want a rec because if nothing else, for an adult to say, yeah, I wasn't the mentor because there was no mentor, and they're verifying that information. So that's helpful to know. Anything else, Elaine?
So I think that is it in the chat. Again, if you have another question or any questions that are super specific to your experience or your project, definitely feel free to shoot us a line at STS, that's societyforscience.org. We'll advance to a slide where you can copy that too. But that is going to be your best way to get an answer from us quickly. And we can't wait to see you and help you answer your questions and make the best applications that you can.
All right, thanks for joining us today, and good luck, everyone. We look forward to receiving your applications in November. Bye-bye.